I want to explain what is happening, why it is happening, and what we propose to do about it. I trust the British people, and I know they understand no government can solve every problem, particularly the complex and global challenge of inflation. But this government will never stop trying to help people, to fix problems where we can, to do what is right, as we did throughout the pandemic. We need to make sure that for those whom the struggle is too hard and for whom the risks are too great, they are supported. This government will not sit idly by whilst there is a risk that some in our country might be set so far back they might never recover. This is simply unacceptable, and we will never allow that to happen. And I want to reassure everybody, we will get through this. We have the tools and the determination we need to combat and reduce inflation. We will make sure the most vulnerable and least well-off get the support they need at this time of difficulty. And we will turn this moment of difficulty into a springboard for economic renewal and growth, with more jobs, higher skills, greater investment. Our plan for a stronger economy. Madam Deputy Speaker, before I turn to the details of our plan, let me put into context for the House the challenge we face. This country is now experiencing the highest rate of inflation we have seen for 40 years. The Bank of England expects inflation to average around 9% this year. Our exposure to global shocks continues to explain most of the inflation above the 2% target. Supply chain disruption as the world reopened from COVID, combined with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and potentially exacerbated by recent lockdowns in China, are all contributing to significant price increases for goods and energy. However, over the course of the year, the situation has evolved and has become more serious. There are areas of particular concern. Even excluding energy and food, core inflation has become broader-based and elevated. Of the basket of goods and services we use to measure inflation, a record proportion are seeing above-average price increases. Also, we are acutely exposed to the European energy price shock, and, like the US, we also have a tight labour market. Make no mistake, the lowest unemployment in almost 50 years, just months after averting a jobs crisis during the pandemic, is good news. But combined with the shock to European energy prices, it does contribute to the UK's relatively high rate of inflation. And lastly, as the bank have noted, longer-term inflation expectations have risen above their historical averages by more than they are in the US and Europe. We cannot and must not allow short-term inflationary pressures to lead people to expect that high inflation will continue over the long term. Because, Madam Deputy Speaker, we can get inflation under control. It is not some abstract force outside our grasp. It may take time, but we have the tools we need and the resolve it will take to reduce inflation. Madam Deputy Speaker, we have 3 specific tools available to combat and reduce inflation, and we are using them all: independent monetary policy, fiscal responsibility, and supply-side activism. First, our primary tool is a strong independent monetary policy. Since control of monetary policy was taken out of the hands of politicians 25 years ago, inflation has averaged precisely 2%. It is right that the Bank of England are independent, and I know the Governor and his team will take decisive action to get inflation back on target and ensure inflation expectations remain firmly anchored. Second, we need responsible fiscal policy. That means providing fiscal support where required, but not making the situation unnecessarily worse, causing inflation, interest and mortgage rates to go up further than they otherwise would, excessively adding fiscal stimulus into a supply-constrained economy, especially one in which households and businesses have built up over £300 billion of excess savings, risks being counterproductive and increasing inflationary pressures. In other words, fiscal support should be timely, temporary, and targeted. Timely because we need to help people when the shock is at its worst. Targeted because unconstrained stimulus will make the problem worse. And temporary because if we do not meet our fiscal rules and ensure the public finances are resilient in the longer run, we create even greater risks on inflation, interest rates, and the trend rate of economic growth. And third, we are taking an activist approach to supply-side reforms. This will increase our productive capacity, ease inflationary pressures, and raise our long-term growth potential. The Prime Minister's energy security strategy will, over time, reduce bills by increasing energy supply and improving energy efficiency. The Work and Pension Secretary is moving 500,000 job seekers off welfare and into work, and doing more to support older people back into the jobs market. The Home Secretary is making our visa regime for high-skilled migrants one of the most competitive in the world. And in the autumn, we will bring forward tax cuts and reforms to encourage businesses to invest more, train more, and innovate more, the path to higher growth. So independent monetary policy, fiscal responsibility, supply-side reform. The country should have confidence that using these three tools, we will combat inflation and that households are being hit hard right now. So today, Madam Deputy Speaker, we will provide significant support to the British people. But as I have said, a critical part of how we are dealing with inflation is responsible fiscal policy. What this means in practical terms is that as we support people more, we need to think about the fairest way to fund as much of that cost as possible. The oil and gas sector is making extraordinary profits, not as the result of recent changes to risk-taking or innovation or efficiency, but as the result of surging global commodity prices, driven in part by Russia's war. And for that reason, I am sympathetic to the argument to tax those profits fairly.
Order. A bit of gentle banter is fine, but when it gets to the stage that nobody can hear what the Chancellor is saying, it's counterproductive. Now, quieter banter, please. Chancellor of the Exchequer.
But, as ever, there is a sensible middle ground. We should not be ideological about this, we should be pragmatic. It is possible to both tax extraordinary profits fairly and incentivise investment. And so, like previous governments, including Conservative ones, we will introduce a temporary targeted energy profits levy, but we have built into the new levy, a new investment allowance similar to the super deduction. That means companies will have a new and significant incentive to reinvest their profits. The new levy will be charged on profits of oil and gas companies at a rate of 25%. It will be temporary, and when oil and gas prices return to historically more normal levels, the levy will be phased out with a sunset clause written into the legislation. And crucially, with our new investment allowance, we are nearly doubling the overall investment relief for oil and gas companies. That means for every pound a company invests, they'll get back 90% in tax relief. So the more a company invests, the less tax they will pay. And we understand also that certain parts of the electricity generation sector are also making extraordinary profits. The reason for this is the way our market works. The price electricity generators are paid is linked not to the cost they incur in providing that electricity, but rather to the price of natural gas, which is extraordinarily high right now. Other countries like France, Italy, Spain, and Greece have already taken measures to correct this. As set out in the Energy Security Strategy, we are consulting with the power generation sector and investors to drive forward energy market reforms and ensure the price paid for electricity is more reflective of the costs of production. But those reforms will take time to implement, so in the meantime, we are urgently evaluating the scale of these extraordinary profits and the appropriate steps to take. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, our energy profits levy will encourage investment, not deter it. It raises around £5 billion of revenue over the next year so that we can help families with the cost of living, and it avoids having to increase our debt burden further. Because there is nothing noble in burdening future generations with ever more debt today, because politicians of the day were too weak to make the tough decisions. Madam Deputy Speaker, I know the whole House will agree we have a responsibility to help those who, through no fault of their own, are paying the highest price for the inflation we face. To help with the cost of living, we are going to provide significant, targeted support to millions of the most vulnerable people in our society, those on the lowest incomes, pensioners and disabled people. First, people on the lowest incomes. Over 8 million households already have incomes low enough for the state to be supporting their cost of living through the welfare system. They could be temporarily unemployed and looking for work, unable to work because of long-term sickness or disability, or on low pay and using benefits to top up their wages. Right now, they face incredibly difficult choices. So I can announce today we will send directly to around 8 million of the lowest income households a one-off cost of living payment of £650. Support worth over £5 billion to give vulnerable people certainty that we are standing by them at this challenging time. DWP will make the payment in 2 lump sums, the first from July, the second in autumn, with payments from HMRC for those on tax credits following shortly after. There is no need for people to fill out complicated forms or bureaucracy. We will send the payment straight to their bank accounts. Our policy will benefit over 8 million households in receipt of means-tested benefits from July. Uprating in that time frame could only be done for those on universal credit, and our policy will provide a larger average payment this year of £650, whereas uprating the same benefits by 9% would be worth only on average £530. There are 2 further groups who will need extra targeted support. Many pensioners are disproportionately impacted by higher energy costs. They can't always increase their incomes through work, and because they spend more time at home and are more vulnerable, they often need to keep the heating on for longer. And we estimate many people who are eligible for pension credit are not currently claiming it, which means there will be many vulnerable pensioners not receiving means-tested benefits. So I can announce today that from the autumn, we will send over 8 million pensioner households who receive the winter fuel payment an extra one-off pensioner cost of living payment of £300. Disabled people also face extra costs in their day-to-day lives, like having energy-intensive equipment around the home or workplace. So, to help the 6 million people who receive non-means-tested disability benefits, we will send them, from September, an extra one-off disability cost of living payment worth £150. Many disabled people will also receive the payment of £650 I have already announced, taking their total cost of living payments to £800. And I can reassure the House that next year, subject to the Secretary of State's review, benefits will be uprated by this September's CPI which on current forecasts is likely to be significantly higher than the forecast inflation rate for next year. Similarly, the triple lock will apply for the state pension. Of course, we recognise the risk that with any policy there may be small numbers of people who will fall between the cracks. For example, it is not possible right now for DWP or HMRC to identify people on housing benefit who are not also claiming other benefits. So to support them and others, we will extend the Household Support Fund delivered by local authorities by £500 million from October. This is a significant set of interventions to support the most vulnerable in our country. We will legislate to deliver this support on the same terms in every part of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland. And taken together, our direct cash payments will help 1/3 of all UK households with a cost of living support worth £9 billion. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, we are meeting our responsibility to provide the most help to those on the lowest incomes. I believe that is fair, and I'm confident the House will agree. But there are many other families who do not require state support in normal times. They are also facing challenging times. Is it fair to leave them unsupported? The answer must surely be no. While it is impossible for the government to solve every problem, we can and will ease the burden as we help the entire country through the worst of this crisis. So we will provide more support with the rising cost of energy, and that support will be universal. Earlier this year, we announced £9 billion to help with the cost of energy, including a council tax rebate of £150 for tens of millions of households. And we plan to provide all households with £200 off their energy bills from October, with the cost of that repaid over the following 5 years. Since then, the outlook for energy prices has changed. I've heard people's concerns over the impact of these repayments on future bills, so I've decided that those repayments will be cancelled. So for the avoidance of doubt, this support is now unambiguously a grant. And furthermore, we have decided that the £200 of support for household energy bills will be doubled to £400 for everyone. We are on the side of hard-working families with £6 billion of financial support. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, to summarise, our strategy is to combat and reduce inflation over time through independent monetary policy, fiscal responsibility and supply-side activism. We are raising emergency funds to help millions of the most vulnerable families who are struggling right now. And all households will benefit from universal support with energy bills of £400 with not a penny to repay. In total, the measures I've announced today provide support worth £15 billion. Combined with the plans we've already announced, that means we are supporting families with the cost of living with £37 billion, or 1.5% of GDP. That's higher or similar than countries like France, Germany, Japan and Italy. And I'm proud to say that around 3/4 of that total support will go to vulnerable households. As a result of the measures we've announced today and the action we've already taken this year, the vast majority of households will receive £550. Pensioners will receive £850. And almost all of the 8 million most vulnerable households in the country will in total receive support of £1,200. And let me put this into context. The House will have noted the news from Ofgem earlier this week. They currently expect the energy price cap to rise in October to £2,800. That implies an average increase in people's bills this year of just under £1,200. The same amount our policies will provide for the most vulnerable people this year. I know there are other pressures. I'm not trying to claim we have solved the entire problem for everyone. No government could. But I hope that when people hear the significant steps we are taking, the millions we are helping, they will feel some of the burden eased, some of the pressures lifted. And they will know this government is standing by them. And Madam Deputy Speaker, in conclusion, supporting people with the cost of living is only one part of our plan for a stronger economy. A plan that is creating more jobs, cutting taxes on working people, reducing our borrowing and debt, driving businesses to invest and innovate more, unleashing a skills revolution, seizing the benefits of Brexit and levelling up growth in all parts of the United Kingdom. The British people can trust this government because we have a plan for a stronger economy, and I commend it to this House.
Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reid.
Madam Deputy Speaker, after today's announcement, let there be no doubt about who is winning the battle of ideas in Britain. It is the Labour Party. Today it feels like the Chancellor has finally realised the problems that the country are facing. We first called for a windfall tax on oil and gas producers nearly 5 months ago to help struggling families and pensioners. Today he has announced that policy, but he can't dare say the words. It's a policy that dare not speak its name with this Chancellor. And it was Labour that first highlighted the unfairness of this government's buy now, pay later compulsory loan scheme. It shouldn't have taken a rocket scientist to work out that this wouldn't cut it, and we pointed it out at the time. But that is just the mark of this Klarner Chancellor. Announce now, ditch later. Here he is, once again, the Treasury's one-man rebuttal unit, the Chancellor himself. For months, it has been clear that more was necessary to help people bring their bills down. So what took this government so long? Every day that they have refused to act, £53 million more added to Britain's household bills during this cost of living crisis. This government's dither and delay has cost our country dearly. On this side of the House, we welcome the fact that the government is finally acting on our calls to introduce a windfall tax.
Absolutely. Our calls.
And it's good to see the SNP U-turning today too and saying that they also are in favour of a windfall tax on oil and gas profits. Well done to the SNP. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, it was a painful journey to get the government to this point. First, Conservative ministers said the oil and gas producers are struggling. That was the Education Secretary, I think. But then the BP Chief Executive said that the energy crisis was a cash machine for his business. So they moved to the second defence. Ministers claimed that a windfall tax would put off vital investment. But the industry said that a windfall tax wouldn't even change their plans. So then they said that a windfall tax would be unconservative. So unconservative, Madam Deputy Speaker, that Margaret Thatcher, George Osborne and now this government are doing exactly that. And finally, the Chancellor himself said that it would be silly to offer help now, given that he didn't know the full scale of the challenge. What nonsense. It shouldn't take £500,000 of publicly funded focus groups for the Chancellor to realise that helping families and pensioners is exactly the right thing to do. Now, every day for 5 months, the Prime Minister sent Conservative MPs out to attack the windfall tax and yet defend an increase in taxes on working people. He's made them vote against it, not once, not twice, but 3 times. And for months he's sent his MPs to defend the litany of rule-breaking in number 10 Downing Street set out in the Sue Gray report yesterday. Now, there is a lesson here for Conservative MPs.
Yeah.
You can't believe a word that this Prime Minister says.
Yeah.
And as long as he is in office, he's going to continue making fools out of each and every one of you.
All of you.
If they keep him there, Madam Deputy Speaker, that is the choice that they are making. Now, the problem, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that you can't fake fairness. You either believe in it or you don't.
Yeah.
Labour called for a windfall tax because it is the right thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
The Conservatives are doing it because they needed a new headline.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we see that too from all the other things that the Chancellor didn't address today. The non-DOMs keeping their tax privileges while they increase taxes on working people.
Yeah.
Young working people paying more, but those who earn money buying and selling stocks and shares not paying a penny more. Contracts handed out to Conservative friends and donors while British businesses miss out. Global tech giants making billions in profits while smaller businesses and the energy-intensive industry struggle with higher bills and higher taxes from the Conservative Party. And £11.8 billion lost in fraud because of a total lack of respect for taxpayers' money. That's why we should have had an emergency budget today. To spike the hike in national insurance, to cut business rates for high street and small businesses, to provide help for energy-intensive firms and ensure that every pound of taxpayers' money is spent wisely. Madam Deputy Speaker, we will look closely at the detail of today's announcements. Of course, most of them seem to have been written by us, but so far, we have seen nothing to suggest that this Conservative government has the ideas or the energy to tackle the challenges that we face as a country. A Labour government would have addressed the underlying weaknesses in our economy so we can stop this spiral of inflation, lift wages and provide greater security for families and for our country. The truth is that they are running our economy and people's living standards into the ground. We are forecast to have the slowest growth and the highest inflation in the G7. This government has weakened the foundations of our economy, leaving us exposed to shocks as we lurch from crisis to crisis. And still they refuse to come forward with a real plan to fix our broken system and provide the security we need to face the future with confidence. That means boosting our energy security too. We need to do much more to reduce reliance on imported oil and gas. That is why Labour's energy security plan includes a programme of home insulation to reduce bills, not just for 1 year, but for years to come, and to get us all the way to net zero. It's why we've urged the government to double onshore wind capacity and to end the delay on nuclear power.
Absolutely.
And while we're at it, why did this Tory government get rid of our gas storage?
Order. It's important that we also hear the Shadow Chancellor. Rachel Reeves.
And Madam Deputy Speaker, while we're at it, why did this Tory government get rid of our gas storage, which would have left us better protected from wild fluctuations in prices? When will this government provide the strong leadership that this country needs? Now, there are a number of questions for the Chancellor about his announcement today. How many people are still waiting for the support that they were promised in March? A third of the Chancellor's own constituents are still waiting for their council tax discounts. Is it the case that households are still being asked to pay the supplier of last resort costs for those energy suppliers who have gone bust as a result of a decade of failed energy market regulation? Can the Chancellor tell the House how is this package being funded outside of the proceeds of a windfall tax? And if you have more than one home, do you get multiple discounts on your energy bills? Now, I know that the Chancellor has adopted 2 of our ideas today, but can I ask why he has not adopted a third? a cut in VAT on energy bills. It was once touted as the big Brexit bonus, but he's ditched that too. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is a discredited, chaotic and rudderless Conservative government whose policies rarely last more than a few months. We pushed for a windfall tax. They adopted it. We said the buy now, pay later scheme was wrong, and now they have ditched it. This government is out of ideas, out of touch, and out of time. When it comes to the big issues facing this country, the position is now clear. We lead, they follow.
Right. Order, order. We're not going any further unless you're quiet. Fine. Thank you. Chairman of the Select Committee, Mel Stride.
Chancellor.
Oh, I beg your pardon. It would be best if I allow the Chancellor first to reply to the Shadow Chancellor. I'm not trying to change the rules. I'm just trying to go a bit faster.
What are you going to say?
Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Say thank you.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Honourable Lady Opposite for her contribution, albeit her response was based on a fundamental misunderstanding of why now is the right time to act. Since February and March, 3 significant things have changed. The situation in Ukraine has altered considerably from first envisaged. Inflation is now tackling considerably higher than previously expected. And finally, and most importantly, we now have concrete information on the autumn and winter energy price cap. And with this information, we were better able to both design and scale our policies. It is why, with time and thought, our energy profits levy has a very generous investment allowance built into it, not something, the blunt instrument that the party opposite proposed. And that is why, Madam Deputy Speaker, because we were patient, we have been able to scale our support for the problem, which means our proposals are in fact more generous than those offered by the party opposite. Because they rushed it, they got their sums wrong. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, we all make mistakes, and being able to change course is not a weakness, it is a strength. And I won't criticise the party opposite for getting it wrong, just so long as they can acknowledge that with this package, we have got it right. Just briefly, Madam Deputy Speaker, to address some of the specific points. The Honourable Lady, I think, talked about energy security and somewhat bizarrely reflected on the lack of investment in nuclear capacity. Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is the government that is correcting the mistakes of the past. She asked about energy efficiency. This is the government that is investing £6 billion to improve energy efficiency. She asked about business rates. This is the government that is delivering a 50% discount in business rates for our high streets next year. And of course, she talked about growth. Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, one of the best ways to drive growth is to drive up business investment, something the party opposite will never understand. She also asked about VAT, Madam Deputy Speaker, and this goes to the heart of the issue. VAT is worth, on average, about £140 of support. Our policy, universally, to all households in this country, is worth £400. That is the reason not to do VAT. What we are doing is far more generous. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, the final point I will make, because I know we're pressed for time, is about ideas. For our constituents, there are only good ideas and bad ideas, and whether you can do anything about them. And this government can, because we are always on the side of the British people. This government has been faced with challenges unlike any other, and at every step it has achieved things that the party opposite said were not possible. We averted the mass unemployment crisis they predicted because of our interventions of furlough. We led the country out of COVID with a vaccine programme they would have left us unable to deliver. And each time I'm at this dispatch box opposite the Honourable Lady, I find myself thinking the same thing. The public can see through it. They know the difference. They know the difference between a party playing politics and a government trying to help.
Thank you. Enough. Enough. And now we will hear from the chairman of the Select Committee, Mel Stride.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I commend this announcement broadly? It is a very significant intervention that my right honourable friend has made, channelling billions of pounds in a targeted series of transfer payments into those who most need it. But as my right honourable friend will know, similar approaches were taken in the pandemic. There were many who missed out from support, who fell through the gaps. I note the additional increase in the household fund of £500 million, which is welcome. Can my right honourable friend set out to the House how he arrived at that figure and why he feels that will be adequate for the demand? And could I also ask him about the issue of inflation that he raised? These transfer payments will stimulate the economy. Granted, they will come with some tax increases as well, but could he share with the House his assessment of the inflationary impact of the announcement that he has just made? And finally, will he appear before the Treasury Select Committee immediately after recess so that we can look at these matters in greater detail?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank my right honourable friend for his questions. I thank him also for his thoughtful advice on how best the government should respond to the current situation. That's why we put the Household Support Fund in place with extra support, because very specifically the one group of those on means-tested benefits that we cannot deliver money to automatically are those who receive only housing benefit, because that's administered by local authorities, which is the main group that needs that specific help. But of course, there may well be others, which is why the fund is there. And in terms of the inflationary impact, I do believe it will be manageable. He's right to highlight it, which is why it's important that the support we provide is both targeted, where it can make the most difference, that it's temporary, and that it is timely and gets help where required. And that is the right approach. Being fiscally responsible is going to help us combat inflation in the long run.
SNP spokesman, Kirsty Blackman.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's quite amusing to hear the Chancellor talk about this being timely. I mean, it is timely. It just happens to have happened the week of the Sugre report. It just happens that that report came out yesterday, and the Chancellor has suddenly realised today that people are really struggling, that he's suddenly realised that he needs to announce something about it. Now, the Chancellor stood up in the spring statement that he made and when he announced the energy loan and said, "Look at these amazing things that I am announcing," and genuinely seemed to believe at that time that that was the best that this government could do. Now he has changed his mind. He has listened to the calls of the opposition. He has listened to the calls of people up and down these islands who are struggling in many cases more than they have ever struggled before. I don't understand, Madam Deputy Speaker, why he has announced only a £15 billion package. He has got £28 billion of fiscal headroom in public sector net debt. He has got £32 billion of fiscal headroom in balancing the current budget. Those are the OBR's figures from March. Yet, he is refusing to spend that money now in the timely, targeted way that it is needed now for people. He has stood up and he has announced, and I am very glad that he has announced money for the poorest households. I'm glad that it's been targeted in that way. It's not enough, Madam Deputy Speaker. What he has announced fails to uprate benefits. It fails to account for the fact that the energy price cap that's coming in October will still be in place next year. It fails to ensure that benefits are keeping pace with inflation. And I have to laugh about the comments he made on inflation. Brexit has increased food prices by 6%. Brexit has done that. People who are struggling to make the most basic costs, whose majority of their costs are being spent on energy and on food, have been hit incredibly hard by Brexit. The poorest 10% of households are seeing a massive inflationary increase in comparison to the richest 10% of households because of the percentage of their budget that is spent on energy and on food. Madam Deputy Speaker, he needs to actually uplift benefits as well as making the payment. The other thing that he chose to do today, which was pretty cheeky, was to include the £150 council tax payment in all of the figures that he was reading out, the rebate. That only went to people in bands A to D. That certainly did not go to all pensioners. That certainly cannot be included in the money that is going to all pensioners, cannot be included in the money that is going to all universal credit claimants, it cannot be included in the money that is going to all disabled people. It cannot be included in the cost of this support package because it is absolutely not universal. And on that point, the payment that we made in Scotland went to a higher percentage of households than the payment that was made in England. Madam Deputy Speaker, this does not go far enough. We are seeing an energy price increase of over £1,000 for all households because of the increase in the energy price cap. And yet he is only providing £300 extra for pensioners. That doesn't even touch the £1,000 increase that there is. He is only including these things. The uplift should have been a 9% uplift for inflation. It should have also included a further 25% uplift to universal credit and a further £25 uplift to universal credit and a further £25 uplift to legacy benefits. Lastly, Madam Deputy Speaker, he has failed in the uplift to disabled people who are facing the very highest cost because of their increase in the energy costs and because of the increase in diets, for example. I'm glad that he's put in place the windfall tax. I'm very disappointed that it only covers oil and gas companies. It should have gone much wider. We've been calling for this since 2020 when Kate Forbes and Brendan Ferguson called for this. We have been calling this. Labour Party failed to move. Failed to support our amendment on this last week.
Right.
So they're a bit cheeky as well in suggesting that we have not moved on this. Madam Deputy Speaker, I would like the Chancellor to go further, to make a difference and to actually care about the poorest people in our society.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I know for some people it will never be enough, but that's why the SNP's plans would leave Scotland with, I think, a 20% budget deficit and bankrupt the country. That's not something that we will ever do for the people of Scotland or the United Kingdom. Her point on food prices I thought surprising and slightly puzzling, given I've just returned from a meeting of international finance ministers from around the world where everyone was talking about increasing food prices. And as far as I know, they didn't all leave the European Union, but I'll leave that to her. She talked about benefits uprating. Maybe she didn't understand exactly what we're announcing. What we are doing for those on means-tested benefits is more generous than uprating. Uprating, on average, would be worth just over £500, whereas the one-off payment is worth £650. And then lastly, she talked about timing. Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, she mentioned many things that have happened this week. The other thing that happened this week is we heard from Ofgem. Yes. And we got more certainty on what the price cap will be in autumn. And that is the single most important factor in trying to size the support that we're providing to people, because it is energy costs that are the biggest driver of the inflation that we're seeing now. Yes.
John Redwood.
When the Chancellor approved £150 billion of extra cash to be printed in November 2020 and gave a full guarantee against losses on the bonds, did he then think there could be any inflationary and public spending risk from this? I fully support giving back the huge windfall tax he is already collecting on energy, the VAT on fuel, the rip-off at the pumps and the much enhanced profits tax coming from North Sea oil and gas. That should be given back because people need some relief. But on inflation, what did he think when he printed the money?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm grateful to my honourable friend for his question. He and I have talked about inflation for quite a while, and he'll know that I have long actually been concerned about the potential of rising inflation and interest rates, something he and I discussed very early in my time in having this job, which is why from the beginning I've been careful to protect our public finances against the costs of rising inflation and interest rates, and I'm glad that we took those decisions, because now, because of that, we're in a position to act and support people.
Clive Betts.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. That's a very specific question about the Household Support Fund. The Chancellor says that anyone, I think he's saying this, wherever people live, if they're in the same circumstances, they'll get the same help from this fund. In other words, local authorities will have no control over how much money is being spent from the fund. Will he therefore give a guarantee that councils will get, pound for pound, from the government, every pound they have to spend to the people who need it?
No, Madam Deputy Speaker, that's not how the Household Support Fund works. It's always been at the request of colleagues in this House and indeed councils for it to be discretionary. What we generally tend to do is provide guidance on the types of people that we expect to have support, but leave the ultimate decision to those in local authorities. In this instance, for example, as I've said, the particular priority ought to be those who receive only housing benefit. The fund is more than sized to deal not just with those, but with others as well. But ultimately, we leave the discretion to local authorities with guidance provided by my colleagues in the Work and Pension Secretary and the DLUC Secretary.
David Davis.
May I give the Chancellor an unreserved welcome for the help for the ordinary citizens? I think now cumulatively it's north of 35 billion all told. But may I raise two concerns? Number one, he talked about the risk of excessive fiscal stimulus. How does he reconcile that with the fact the latest figures show we're taking more money out of the economy than we ever have in history? Secondly, on the windfall tax, it will raise a small amount of money. Stability of tax and low tax both encourage investment and growth. Is there not a risk that the Exchequer will lose more in growth than it would gain in the windfall tax?
I thank my right honourable friend for his question. With regard to the figures on borrowing and stimulus, we actually are still running a relatively significant budget deficit this year, forecast to be 4% back in spring. So I wouldn't regard that as particularly tight policy on the fiscal side, and we will further, as I said, add support today. With regard to tax, I do believe it's important to continue to support investment. I believe the way that we've designed the energy profits levy with a doubling of the investment relief in it will mean that companies still have a very strong incentive to invest in the North Sea.
Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. People on prepayment meters, many of whom are on the lowest incomes, are still paying more for their energy than people who pay by direct debit. And they are increasingly likely to self-disconnect, to turn off the light and the warmth. When is the government going to act to end this price discrimination against some of the least well-off members of our society?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I know my right honourable friend, the Energy Secretary, is engaged with all the companies on how best to support people through this. With regards to the support we've announced today, about 7% of households are on non-smart prepayment meters, and we want to make sure that we get their support to them, and that has been taken into account and will be delivered through vouchers. And the remaining the remaining prepayment meters are smart, and the credit can be put straight on those meters, so they benefit.
Laura Trott.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can my right honourable friend confirm that under Labour's plans, my most vulnerable constituents in Swanley, in West Ham and elsewhere will receive £600, but under our plans, they'll receive £1,200?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. The combination of all the support we've announced means that someone on almost everybody on means-tested benefits should be in receipt of £1,200 of direct support from this government, and as she says, double, I think, the support offered by the party opposite.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And the word which occurs to me today is finally. Finally, after months of families in this country, proud families in this country who've never needed help before, crying out for help from this Chancellor. For pensioners who were sitting in cold houses in the winter because they couldn't afford to heat them. For all those people, for those families unable to put food on the table, this has come as too little, too late. As Liberal Democrats, we were calling on the Chancellor to bring in a windfall tax on the excess profits of energy companies in October, when it could have made a difference in the winter. Instead of which, the Chancellor was hiking up taxes and adding to the national insurance burden of those already hardest hit. So today, what I'd like to say to him is, will he listen the next time when from this side of the House he gets an idea, a suggestion that would help the people of this country rather than hike up their taxes?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, 70% of those in work will pay less tax this year than they did last year because of the changes we've made. And I said, now is the time to act because we have more certainty over what the price cap in the autumn will be. We're 2/3 of the way through the observation window. Ofgem have given us a sense, and that means we can scale the support appropriately.
Kevin Hollandrick.
Mr. Speaker, can I warmly welcome my honourable friend's statement. I did think the Shadow Chancellor made a very fair point, actually, which was how we're going to fund this £15 billion. But isn't it also fair to ask, on the basis that the windfall taxes only would raise about £3 billion by Labour's calculations, how will they fund all the spending plans they've announced today and in previous occasions, and the tax reductions she's announced today and her previous tax reductions she's announced?
Well, my honourable friend makes an excellent point. I think at last count we've had, £100 billion of spending commitments or tax reductions from the Labour Party. Less than a tenth of that has been funded, in spite of the Shadow Chancellor saying that she's committed to fiscal responsibility, because it's the same old story, Madam Deputy Speaker, with Labour. They ultimately always run out of other people's money.
Naz Shah.
Speaker, and I congratulate the Chancellor for pinching some of our ideas, and I'd really encourage him to look at the 17.5% of VAT as well. One of my constituents sent me a copy of bills. January 2021, electricity 10,731.70. January 2022, 48,694.56. 353.745% increase. How is the Chancellor's statement from today and his intervention going to help my businesses in my constituency, because he seems to have left them out?
Madam Deputy Speaker, with regard to businesses, we have the Energy Intensive Industry Support Scheme, which my honourable friend, the Business Secretary, is consulting on improving, extending and improving the generosity of. That helps our most energy-intensive industries in the country.
David Gibbard.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. As the Chancellor knows, I have spoken in this House and to himself privately against Labour's proposals for a windfall tax, which I was waiting for the heckle, which, in my opinion, as I believe is shared by the Chancellor, were entirely blunt and too blunt an instrument and frankly punitive for the sake of being punitive. I welcome the Chancellor's support for those most affected by the rising costs, and I welcome his more targeted and specific approach to excess profits in the oil and gas industry and the relief on investment, which is already extensive, as my right honourable friend knows. Can I ask just two questions? Can he provide assurance that that charge will be applied to excess profits, and that those will be distinguished between the profits, or the increase in profits that would be expected in the natural cycle since the downturn of the last 12 years? And will he also commit to continue the constructive dialogue with the industry that has already been evident from this government in the interests of energy security and energy transition to net zero?
Yeah. Well, I thank my honourable friend, and he's an excellent champion for the industry, and he's right to be so, because it's an important industry for the success of our future economy, Madam Deputy Speaker. It employs hundreds of thousands of people, it invests an enormous amount, and we want to see that industry succeed, and I know with his support and this government's, we will make sure that that happens.
Gavin Newlands.
Well, Rishi Sunak announcing there a temporary targeted energy profits levy. When is that not a windfall tax? We can discuss that throughout the rest of the day here on Sky. Welcome to Sky News at 1. After months of pressure from these opposition parties, the Chancellor has announced a windfall tax on energy companies, which he says will raise £5 billion over the next year to help households struggling with the cost of living crisis. Well, Rishi Sunak unveiled a number of new measures, which he says will help people across the country deal with soaring costs. But Labour has responded by calling him a buy now, ditch later Chancellor. Let's have a look at some of the key announcements. Well, in total, £15.3 billion will be handed out, £650 to 8 million low-income households on benefits. The £200 energy bill rebate will no longer need to be repaid and will be doubled to £400. Pensioners will receive a one-off £300 payment in the winter, paid alongside the winter fuel allowance. And a one-off cost of living payment of £150 will be paid to those on disability benefits on top of the other.
We should not be ideological about this, we should be pragmatic. It is possible to both tax extraordinary profits fairly and incentivise investment. And so, like previous governments, including Conservative ones, we will introduce a temporary targeted energy profits levy, but we have built into the new levy But we have built into the new levy a new investment allowance similar to the super deduction. That means companies will have a new and significant incentive to reinvest their profits.
Today it feels like the Chancellor has finally realised the problems that the country are facing. We first called for a windfall tax on oil and gas producers nearly 5 months ago to help struggling families and pensioners. Today he has announced that policy, but he can't dare say the words. It's a policy that dare not speak its name with this Chancellor. And it was Labour that first highlighted the unfairness of this government's buy now, pay later compulsory loan scheme. It shouldn't have taken a rocket scientist to work out that this wouldn't cut it, and we pointed it out at the time. But that is just the mark of this Klarner Chancellor. Announce now, ditch later.
Well, our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, is here in the studio. Ed, so financially, how great a difference will this make to the worst off?
Well, it depends on kind of, which types of households you're talking about, because a lot of this was quite targeted on particular groups. So you've got, for 8 million people on means-tested benefits, there will be this one-off payment of £650. It's a lot of money. That is a lot of money, and it's going to cost quite a lot of money as well, £5 billion. But that is significant, particularly for those on lower incomes and means-tested benefits. For pensioners, you've got a kind of one-off £300. For those on disability benefits, one-off £150. These things are pretty big amounts of money, so that's not insignificant at all. And some people might want to be dismissive, but this is really quite a lot of money. Obviously, in the face of what people are going through, a cost of living disaster, the likes of which we haven't seen for many years, it is still not necessarily going to mean that you're kind of up compared with the previous year. But that's quite a lot. But looking more broadly at kind of average households, it's kind of a slightly different story. Let me show you, actually, because earlier on we were looking at some of these charts, basically showing the kind of history of what's happened with spending on energy. And this is kind of what this comes down to, and a lot of what Rishi Sunak was talking about here was trying to keep this line down. The amount that we spend on energy, going back all the way to 1957, has always been within that kind of that border, that blue area you can see. And recently it's gone up to... well, that's the expectation. That's where it is at the moment, I should say. It's kind of highest level since the 1980s. That dotted line shows you where it's expected to go later on this year, the £2,800 price cap. And obviously, look at that dotted line. That is the highest in terms of the share of people's incomes that they're spending, or their total spending that's going on energy, that we've ever seen before. So the question is, how does the Chancellor get that down? And last time, in the spring statement, and of course those plans with the energy rebate, he got the line down to there. And what's different this time around? So extra money, rather than it being £200 for most households, it's £400. Rather than it being a rebate, it's permanent. And that brings this down. Look at the kind of red line, and look also at this dotted line here, the share of our spending that we spend on energy. I'm going to show you where we are potentially as of these plans. You can see it does go down, and it's now kind of within that box. So we're no longer in unprecedented territory. It would only be, well, I say only in inverted commas, the highest since the late 1980s. That's a slightly rough and ready calculation, but that's kind of the best I've been able to work this out. This would bring down total spending on energy quite significantly. And worth saying, as I said a moment ago, it's different for different types of households. This is the average household, to the extent that there is such a thing. But looking across, if you are on means-tested benefits, if you're a pensioner, then and receiving winter fuel allowance, so not all pensioners, then you are potentially going to see a significant fall compared with this. But bear in mind as well, for a lot of people on lower incomes, the amount they pay on their energy, and the higher this is, the more you're paying on your energy as a share of your total spending. Best way of looking at it over time. That is much higher for different income groups. I mean, there were all sorts of other things in there. Actually, it was quite a lot of info to absorb. The other thing, obviously, was what happens with the windfall tax. I think we can call it a windfall tax. I think we've decided that, this is basically a windfall tax. And so far, previous profits from Shell and BP, that was last time around, just to give you background about why, more money potentially will be coming off this. So the Chancellor will be taking a lot more money out of the profits of those energy giants. But here's the thing, you're getting about £5 billion, he said, from that. Because this is not a budget, we don't have full kind of figures from the Chancellor, which is a bit frustrating. You're getting about £5 billion from that. This is a £15 billion package, so you've still got extra money that needs to come from somewhere. Where's it going to come? We're going to have to see. And there's other bits in there besides that, you know, the things like the triple lock coming back in, things like benefits being uprated. That could be incredibly expensive in the coming years. So there's actually quite a lot in this to discuss. And, you know, I know, you know, over the course of the next few hours, we'll bring you more analysis on what's coming through as we get the data from the Treasury. But also just all these U-turns, Jane. I mean, you know, you can call them U-turns, you can call them kind of convenient or pragmatic changes. But, you know, not long ago, Rishi Sunak was against the triple lock. It's all about the double lock. Not long ago, he was against windfall taxes. Now it's about windfall taxes. Not long ago, it was about energy repayments. Now it's grants. And finally, that fact on how the energy... Can I just show you one more thing? The energy outlook has changed, he said, in the statement. So everything has changed. The reason we're doing this, the reason we're doing all these U-turns is because everything changed. Well, you know, actually, back in the March spring statement, the Office for Budget Responsibility said, you know, we're talking about £2,800 bills already. So no, actually, the outlook for all of our bills is basically the same as it was last time around. It just seems like something else has changed, and that's, you know, there's a lot going on politically, and clearly also there's an acknowledgement that maybe what they did before just wasn't enough.
Well, let's talk about what has happened politically and perhaps why it's happening today. Our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, is here. And Sam, Ed alluded to it, and Rishi Sunak said there in the Commons, to change course is a sign of strength, not of weakness. This is a change of government course, isn't it?
Absolutely extraordinary in the way that they've pivoted. It was just a matter of weeks ago that the Treasury was insisting that there'd be no more help really until the autumn. And that's the point where energy prices go up again. They delivered the help in the spring statement, which was just 3 months ago, which was a statement where Rishi Sunak wrapped himself in the language of the need for fiscal responsibility. We saw none of that today. £15 billion spent, but I don't think that includes the long-term increase in benefit payments that he talked about when it comes to uprating some of the key benefits from next year. So this is incredibly costly. But as Ed was just alluding to, you do wonder quite what the definition of conservatism is under Boris Johnson at the moment, given they didn't want to do anything. They've now had to. They've abandoned their opposition to the windfall tax, even if they try and call it something different. They've abandoned their attempt to claw back money on energy bills. He's doing something, one of the big points in the spring statement, which was Rishi Sunak's big moment just 3 months ago, which was to say, look, we can't do anything else that would be inflationary. The cost of servicing our debt is extraordinary. It's over £80 billion. Inflation is the key. Now he's doing a lot of stuff that, as one of his own backbenchers pointed out, could well be inflationary. Rishi Sunak today just said, well, that's the price we've got to pay. It'll be worth it. And this is a fiscally responsible Conservative Party paying for it through borrowing, not spelling out where the vast majority of this spending is going to come from. £15 billion, if you exclude the benefit stuff, being spent to date, £5 billion, I believe, from the windfall tax. So where's the other £10 billion coming from? Is it the money that would have gone in the future to perhaps paying for that income tax cut? And you mentioned tax cuts. This is just the start. We're being told that if there are going to be tax cuts, and there almost certainly are, they'll come in the autumn budget. So a few more months to wait. But you'll have a Conservative Party banking this large amount of spending and then asking what's next in terms of tax cuts in just a few more months. This is not a Conservative Party of the sort, I think, that George Osborne would particularly recognise.
And what about the timing of today's announcement? Of course, funnily enough, we had the Partygate inquiry released yesterday. We've had two MPs saying that they're not backing the Prime Minister since then. Is it curious that Rishi Sunak suddenly decided today to make this announcement?
Oh, of course it was, Jane. This announcement today was not absolutely nailed on Tuesday. It's now Thursday and they've just spent 15 billion quid. So, of course, the political context is all. You saw the Sue Gray report yesterday. We have now had 3 Conservative MPs come out since that to say that Boris Johnson should go. Yesterday, Julian Sturdy. Today, John Barron and David Simmons. Interestingly, all making different arguments why he should go. John Barron suggesting that he just thinks that Boris Johnson is responsible in a way that Sue Gray didn't a responsibility that Sue Gray didn't specifically assign him to. So John Barron going further than the Sue Gray report, report. David Simmons just saying, look, Boris Johnson isn't particularly popular anymore with the electorate. So you've got those MPs coming out. I think £15 billion will help calm nerves a bit because Tory MPs, who as of today, after this statement, will head off back to their constituencies for recess, they'll have something to say to their constituents other than just having to defend allegations around Partygate. But my sense is twofold. First of all, I think, talking to lots of MPs this morning, that people are still digesting the impact of the Sue Gray report politically in a funny way. We've just had, in the last few minutes, Downing Street's official spokesman apologise personally for lying to journalists for months. This is not normal behaviour. This is not the kind of politics that almost any Tory MP is proud of. But then they'll also have to work out whether this just ends up looking like a gigantic cheque to try and make some of these political problems go away. I'm sure the opposition will make that case. The government will say this is help needed urgently, needed now. But will Boris Johnson just throw money at the country every time he's in trouble? Maybe there's a case for it. Maybe it's popular. Maybe that's the right thing to do. But that, I think, is going to be the conversation in the weeks and months to come.
OK, we're going to move on from this, but I know, Ed, you quickly want to come in with something?
Well, just to echo 2 points that Sam has made. First of all, where is this £10 billion coming from? Actually, at the moment, the Treasury is not especially clear on this, but it's a lot of money. And secondly, a lot of this will be really inflationary. The Chancellor started off his statement by saying we need to fight inflation, and then the second half of his statement is doing things that are basically going to bake in further inflation for the coming years. So there's some weirdness going on.
A lot to think about. Ed and Sam, thank you both very much. Great analysis. Well, if you have any questions about the cost of living crisis, we're going to be having an hour-long Q&A with experts on the issue at 7 o'clock tonight. Scan the QR code on your screen now or email news@sky.com to get your questions answered. Well, let's move on now to the US, and there's been criticism of the police response to the shooting at a school in Texas in which 19 children and 2 teachers were killed. It's emerged that the gunman may have been in the school for up to an hour before he was shot dead. The father of one of the dead children has spoken of the tragedy, as well as a 9-year-old boy who escaped the attack. Ashna Hurinag reports.
What Chance saw and heard on Tuesday afternoon will likely haunt him forever. As Salvador Ramos stormed into Robb Elementary School, he and his friends hid and waited to be rescued.
Everybody was scared. We were all panicking because we didn't know what was really happening. All we saw were thousands of police and Border Patrol coming into the cafeteria. And we were all hiding behind the stage in the cafeteria when it happened. All that